"I can restore the museum artifact in 1 hour," said the janitor. The curator laughed in disbelief. "A custodian repair priceless history?" When a museum janitor faces the damaged ancient sculpture and says he can restore it in 1 hour, the museum board's silence reveals that nobody imagines what comes next. Dr. Victoria Sterling, the Metropolitan Museum director everyone called the Iron Curator, stood in the emergency board meeting, slamming her designer portfolio on the mahogany table so hard the water glasses jumped. "What do you mean the restoration specialist can't come until next month? This is catastrophic. The Chen Dynasty jade sculpture was damaged during last night's security incident. It's valued at $18 million. The insurance company is threatening our coverage. The Chinese Cultural Ministry is demanding answers. Our reputation is destroyed, and I'm facing termination." The conference room screens showed the disaster. The priceless 3rd-century jade sculpture, on loan from Beijing, now had a fractured base and separated mounting after a clumsy security guard knocked it during rounds. The museum's contracted restoration specialist was on assignment in Europe and couldn't return until next month. The sculpture couldn't be displayed in its damaged state. The exhibition opening was in 3 days, and international embarrassment loomed. In this chaos of crisis calls and legal consultations, Li Wei pushed through the staff entrance, custodial uniform still damp from mopping the galleries, cleaning cart beside him. Li was 63, but looked 80, from decades scrubbing floors and polishing displays, breathing chemical cleaners and working night shifts nobody else wanted. His uniform was faded, his shoes were worn through at the heels, and his hands showed the permanent stains of industrial cleaning solutions. But his eyes had a different gleam when they landed on the damaged photos being projected on the conference screen, the gleam of someone recognizing something far more than just broken stone. He approached the cluster of board members and administrators, arguing about insurance liability. "Excuse me, Dr. Sterling," Li said in accented English, removing his cap respectfully. "I can restore that sculpture. 1 hour, maybe less. The jade isn't cracked, just the adhesive bond on the mounting failed. I can rebond it using traditional methods with natural resin compound. It will be stronger than before, historically appropriate." The silence that followed lasted 9 seconds, but felt like eternity. Then the Iron Curator turned, saw the janitor in cleaning uniform smelling of floor polish, and let out a laugh so cold it made the board members stop their legal discussions to watch. "Get this ignorant custodian out of here. This is an $18 million artifact requiring certified museum conservators and climate-controlled restoration labs, not janitorial fantasies. Security, remove him immediately before his presumption embarrasses us further." The museum security guards approached, hands gesturing toward the exit. Board members gathering for the crisis vote paused to watch, some recording the audacity. Li didn't move, didn't lower his eyes, just held his cap with both work-stained hands and kept looking at the sculpture photos as if they were speaking to him in a language only they understood. That's when the woman approached. She'd been sitting quietly in the corner since the meeting began, observing with a small notepad and an unreadable expression. She wore a modest, dark suit, sensible shoes, visitor badge on a lanyard. She looked like just another Museum Association observer or cultural liaison. But there was something about her presence, a quiet authority that needed no introduction. "Let the man speak, Victoria," she said with a calm but firm voice that cut through the contemptuous laughter. Dr. Sterling turned, irritated. "And you are?" "Grace Liu, Smithsonian Institution Museum Practices Evaluator. I'm here reviewing your institutional protocols for the National Accreditation Renewal," she said evenly, showing credentials. "I strongly recommend you hear what this employee is proposing." Li turned to her, grateful for basic human respect. "This sculpture doesn't need modern conservation labs, ma'am. It needs someone who understands traditional methods. I can see from the photos the jade itself is undamaged. The mounting separated because whoever attached it last used modern epoxy that becomes brittle over time. I can clean the old adhesive carefully and rebond it using the traditional pine resin and mineral compound method that's been used for jade for 2,000 years. 1 hour of careful work. The sculpture will be stable, historically authentic, ready for display. The silence returned, transformed now. It was the silence of institutional incredulity. Dr. Sterling took 3 steps forward, face flushed with indignation. 1 hour? You've been inhaling too many cleaning fumes, Wei. Our certified conservator says this requires weeks in a controlled environment with modern bonding agents. You're a janitor who probably never finished grade school. Leave immediately, or I'll have security physically remove you and terminate your employment for gross insubordination. But Lee didn't look at Dr. Sterling. He looked only at Grace, straight in her eyes, with a serenity that disarmed professional skepticism. I only need access to the artifact, basic hand tools, traditional materials I can prepare myself, pine resin, mineral powder, gentle solvents. I owe this museum nothing. I just want to help. This sculpture deserves to be whole, to be honored properly. Those last words hung in the tense boardroom air. Grace Liu, who wasn't actually Smithsonian, but Dr. Margaret Chen, the new director of the National Museum Council conducting anonymous institutional evaluations, felt something catch in her throat. Not pity, recognition. She saw in that janitor something utterly absent in all the credentialed curators, all the expensive conservators, all the modern restoration protocols. Pure reverence born from cultural understanding. Give him supervised access, Grace said, and her voice permitted no argument. Dr. Sterling opened her mouth to protest, but the look she received from this supposed Smithsonian evaluator made her reconsider the career implications of refusing a National Museum authority. But if he causes any additional damage to that artifact, you're both personally and criminally liable for $18 million, Sterling hissed, turning to call the museum's insurance attorneys. Lee grabbed his small toolkit from his locker and was escorted to the conservation room where the damaged sculpture sat under intense lighting. Grace followed, carrying observation notes and camera. When they entered, the reality was breathtaking. The jade sculpture was exquisite, a 3rd-century masterpiece depicting a celestial dragon, the stone so translucent it seemed to glow from within. The fractured mounting looked like a wound on something sacred. Lee approached slowly, reverently, his worn hands hovering above the jade without touching, his eyes examining every detail. Grace stayed back, watching. How did you know about traditional jade bonding methods, Lee? Lee paused, still studying the sculpture without touching. I was trained in Beijing, ma'am, at the Palace Museum Conservation Workshop. That was 1982. I was apprenticed to Master Zhao, who learned from the last imperial craftsman. I spent 7 years learning to work with jade, bronze, porcelain, all the traditional methods. But then I spoke against government corruption, was blacklisted. I fled to America in 1989 after Tiananmen. My Chinese credentials meant nothing here. So I cleaned floors, grateful just to be near beautiful things again, even if only to polish the cases they sit in. Grace felt her chest tighten. The story of so many talented immigrants, credentials dismissed, expertise wasted. And why are you offering to do this for free, risking liability? You could demand consultant fees, proper recognition. Lee finally looked at her, his weathered face serious in the bright conservation lights. Ma'am, when you can help, you help. This sculpture was made by artists like my teachers, maybe even distant ancestors. It survived 1,700 years of wars, revolutions, earthquakes. It deserves better than to sit broken because modern people forgot the old ways. Money doesn't matter. Honoring the past matters. Honoring the artists who created this beauty. That's everything. Grace felt unexpected tears threatening. She stood before something increasingly rare, selfless mastery driven by cultural reverence rather than profit or recognition. In that instant, she made a decision that would change 2 lives and potentially transform how museums valued traditional knowledge. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the conservation room windows. Lee was preparing his traditional bonding materials when the sound of urgent voices echoed down the corridor. A team of people in white lab coats swept into the room, led by a woman in her 40s carrying an impressive equipment case. "Dr. Sterling," she announced. "It's me, Dr. Amanda Foster from the International Conservation Institute. I rearranged my entire European schedule and flew back when I heard about the Chen Dynasty disaster." Dr. Sterling practically ran down from her office like salvation had arrived in a lab coat. "Dr." Foster adjusted her magnifying visor and smiled with the confidence of someone who'd never failed because they only accepted prestigious, high-fee projects. "I've handled 17 jade restorations for major museums, brought my specialized equipment, and can have initial stabilization complete by tomorrow, with full restoration finished in 3 weeks. My emergency consultation fee is $75,000 plus materials and lab time." She noticed Lee at the work table, mixing pine resin and mineral powder in a small ceramic bowl using ancient methods. And who is this person touching the artifact preparation area?" Dr. Sterling let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, that's just our custodian claiming he can restore it in 1 hour with some traditional method. Absurd. But this Smithsonian evaluator insisted we let him try." Dr. Foster looked alarmed, professionally horrified. "Sir, museum-grade conservation requires certified training, climate-controlled environments, and modern archival materials. Traditional methods are unpredictable and could cause irreversible damage. This is an $18 million artifact, not a craft project." She moved to stop Lee when Grace stepped forward and blocked her path. "Dr. Amanda Foster, is it?" Grace asked, voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Yes, International Conservation Institute, certified by UNESCO, publications in 12 professional journals." "I'm the Smithsonian Institutional Evaluator," Grace replied, "and accreditation protocol requires observing all proposed methodologies before authorizing $75,000 in emergency expenditures from museum budgets." Dr. Foster blinked, surprised but also intrigued professionally. "With respect, ma'am, traditional bonding methods lack the archival stability of modern conservation-grade adhesives. He could compromise the artifact's long-term preservation." Before anyone could respond, Dr. Foster was deploying her sophisticated analysis equipment, taking microscopic photos, running chemical analysis of the existing adhesive residue, documenting everything for her restoration protocol. She worked with academic precision, and museum staff gathering in the doorway filmed the impressive professional operation. Lee just took a deep breath, carefully cleaned the old brittle epoxy from the jade and mounting using gentle solvents and soft brushes, and prepared to apply his traditional bonding compound with hands that had done this hundreds of times decades ago. No anger on his weathered face, just ancient sadness from seeing the same pattern repeat for 35 years. Credentials confusing expense with expertise, modern methods dismissing traditional wisdom. Grace stayed in the conservation room, documenting Lee's process with photos, noting every careful movement. "Aren't you going to defend your methodology to her?" Lee shook his head, working with surgical precision. "Don't need to, ma'am. The jade will speak for me. Beauty and truth speak the same language." For 90 minutes, Dr. Foster worked with maximum academic visibility. She ran chemical analyses, generated comprehensive restoration proposals, explained complex conservation theory. Museum staff watched, impressed. Dr. Sterling stood beside Dr. Foster like a vindicated authority, nodding whenever Foster said something that sounded scholarly and expensive. See here, Director. My analysis shows the original adhesive was completely inappropriate for jade. Wrong pH, wrong flexibility index. My protocol uses archival-grade epoxy formulated specifically for stone conservation, reversible with proper solvents, stable for centuries. 75,000 for consultation and materials, 3 weeks timeline. She generated more documentation, created detailed treatment proposals, scientific data-filled screens. Analysis complete and protocol approved, Dr. Foster announced to the gathered staff and board members. Begin treatment tomorrow after proper environmental preparation. Cost, $75,000 plus lab time. Timeline, 3 weeks. Grace said nothing, just watched Lee applying the traditional pine resin compound to the cleaned surfaces with a delicate brush, his movements showing decades of trained muscle memory. 3 weeks, Lee murmured, heating the resin slightly to perfect consistency. 3 weeks while the exhibition space stays empty, while the cultural exchange is embarrassed. Grace felt something profound shift inside her. The immigrant janitor understood cultural dignity in ways the experts never would. You said 1 hour. Lee checked the small timer he'd brought from the custodial closet. 48 minutes so far, ma'am. Should be bonded and stable in 12 more minutes. That's when it happened. Dr. Foster, wanting to demonstrate her equipment's capabilities, decided to run a structural integrity scan of the jade itself to check for internal damage before proposing her treatment. She aimed her high-resolution ultrasound scanner at the sculpture, but what the scan revealed shocked everyone. The internal structure of the jade showed hairline stress fractures throughout, not from the recent damage, but from previous restoration attempts. Dr. Foster's confident expression crumbled. This is showing internal damage from previous conservation work. Someone used adhesives that caused chemical stress in the jade itself. If I apply modern epoxy, the differential expansion rates could propagate these internal fractures. I could shatter an $18 million artifact. Her face went pale. Traditional methods use natural materials with expansion rates matching stone. That's why they've worked for millennia. I can't proceed with modern adhesives without risking catastrophic damage. This is outside my expertise. Dr. Sterling's face went white. So we have no solution? Dr. Foster shook her head, looking genuinely troubled by the ethical implications. Not from modern conservation science, not safely. You need traditional methods that won't stress the damaged stone. But that's not my specialty. She began packing her expensive equipment, clearly shaken by the revelation that ancient techniques were superior for this application. Within 20 minutes, she was leaving. Her $75,000 consultation never started. Lee continued working, unhurried, pressing the bonded pieces together with exact pressure, knowing from experience precisely how much force the curing resin needed. After another 10 minutes, he released his hands and stepped back. Ma'am, the bond is set. The sculpture is restored. It should cure fully in 24 hours, then be ready for display. The silence was absolute. Dr. Sterling stared at Lee like seeing him for the first time as a human being rather than invisible labor. Grace felt her pulse racing, and that's when she spoke, her voice carrying through the conservation room with undeniable authority. Li Wei, you have full authorization. Chief Conservator, verify the restoration quality immediately. The museum's head conservator, who'd been watching skeptically, examined the restoration with magnifying equipment, tested the bond strength gently, inspected the jade under special lighting. His skeptical expression slowly transformed to amazement. This is extraordinary work. The bond is perfect, properly aligned. The traditional compound is already hardening beautifully. This is museum-quality restoration using historically appropriate methods. perhaps even better than our modern techniques for this particular application. The staff erupted in whispers. Board members looked confused but impressed. Li Wei packed his simple tools, preparing to return to mopping floors, when Grace stopped him. Dr. Sterling stood frozen as Grace removed her fake Smithsonian credentials and pulled out her real identification as National Museum Council Director. Victoria Sterling, you're suspended pending investigation for systematic undervaluation of staff expertise and creating a hostile environment for traditionally trained artisans. She turned to Li Wei, the council is creating a new traditional conservation methods program. You'll be master instructor, teaching museum conservators worldwide the techniques being lost to modernization. We'll also fast-track recognition of your Beijing credentials. Salary, 112,000 annually plus full benefits. Will you accept? Li looked at the official appointment letter she extended, at the restored sculpture glowing under the lights, at the dragon that seemed to smile at him across 17 centuries. He fell to his knees, crying, 35 years of invisible labor finally ending. 6 months later, Li led the National Museum Council's Traditional Methods Division, teaching conservators across 50 museums the ancient techniques that computers and chemistry couldn't replace. And every morning he'd touch the jade dragon sculpture, feeling the warm stone beneath his hands, and whisper in Mandarin, then English, "Thank you, Master Zhao. Thank you for teaching me that old wisdom still preserves beauty for future generations."